Is this some kind of mistake? The flight attendant's words sliced through the jet bridge, echoing louder than the engines outside. 17-year-old Amara Jackson clutched her first-class boarding pass, heart pounding, as the woman's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Behind her, passengers sighed impatiently, the tension thick and suffocating. Amara had worked years for this moment, a scholarship, a design that could revolutionize aviation, and yet one glance reduced her to a fraud. What no one knew was that the CEO himself, the man whose airline she was boarding, had handpicked her for this flight. And before it landed, justice would rewrite the entire cabin's hierarchy. Seat 2A, first-class Sky Global Airlines flight 382 from Atlanta to Los Angeles. The flight attendant's eyes flicked from the boarding pass and back again. Her expression, a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. The smile she'd offered to the businessman ahead of Amara had vanished, replaced by pursed lips and narrowed eyes. Amara stood tall, despite the unspoken accusation. Her NASA hoodie, though clean and new, purchased specifically for this trip, suddenly felt inadequate under the flight attendant's scrutiny. She'd paired it with simple black joggers and brand new white sneakers, an outfit she'd carefully chosen for the 6-hour flight, professional enough to honor the occasion, comfortable enough for travel. The pass says 2A, Amara said quietly but firmly. It was booked by the Eliza Cruz Foundation. In her mind, Amara replayed the moment she'd received the news. 6 months of work on her revolutionary winglet design, a modification that could reduce aircraft drag by 4.3%, potentially saving millions in fuel costs annually, had earned her the inaugural Eliza Cruz Memorial Scholarship for Young Innovators. The prize included a substantial educational grant and an all-expenses-paid trip to Los Angeles to present at the prestigious AeroVision Innovation Summit. Professor Daniels, her mentor at the Advanced STEM program, had hugged her tightly when the email arrived. They don't just give first-class tickets to anyone. Amara, he'd said, this is their way of saying you belong in those spaces. You earned this. Now standing in the jet bridge with a line forming behind her, that sense of belonging was being questioned before she'd even boarded. The Eliza Cruz Foundation. The flight attendant repeated slowly, as if testing the truthfulness of the words. Her name tag read, Victoria Palmer, Senior Cabin Crew. Behind Amara, an impatient sigh cut through the air. Is there a problem? A woman's crisp voice demanded. Some of us have connections to make. Amara turned slightly. The voice belonged to a woman in her mid-40s, wearing a tailored cream blazer over a silk blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in an immaculate low bun. A diamond tennis bracelet glinted on her wrist as she checked her watch, an obvious gesture of impatience. It shouldn't be much longer, Amara said with a politeness that belied her discomfort. The woman gave Amara a dismissive once over her eyes, lingering on the NASA hoodie before looking away, clearly having categorized Amara as not worth her attention. Victoria handed back the boarding pass with obvious reluctance. It appears to be an order, she said, her tone suggesting the opposite. First class is through the door, first section on your left. Try not to block the aisle while getting settled. The instruction was delivered, as if Amara had never been on an airplane before, though this was her 7th flight, just her first in first class and her first alone. Amara stepped into the aircraft, immediately enveloped by the distinctive atmosphere of a premium cabin. The air was different here. Cooler, somehow cleaner, the lighting softer. The ceiling seemed higher. The sound was different too. Less of the plastic rustling and shuffling that characterized the economy sections. She was used to more of a hushed, dignified murmur. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 787 contained just 16 seats arranged in 4 rows of paired pods. Each seat was an island of cream leather and polished wood veneer with privacy screens that could be adjusted for solitude or conversation. Fresh orchids sat in small wall sconces. The overhead bins were already open, waiting to discreetly swallow designer luggage. Men in tailored suits and women with immaculate blowouts were settling into their seats, some already sipping pre-departure champagne from real glass flutes. A few glanced up as Amara passed their expressions, a mixture of curiosity, and she couldn't help feeling assessment. Seat 2A was a window position on the left side of the aircraft. As Amara approached, she saw that Seat 2B, the aisle seat beside hers, was already occupied by the impatient woman from the jet bridge. She was now tapping furiously on her phone, a leather portfolio open on the wide console between the seats. Amara stowed her backpack, which contained her laptop with all her designs, a notebook and a dog-eared copy of Advanced Fluid Dynamics in the overhead compartment, and slid into her seat. The leather was buttery soft against her palms as she ran her hands over the armrests, allowing herself a small moment of appreciation. "Excuse me," she said to her seatmate. "I'm in 2A." The woman Amara would soon learn her name was Elizabeth Morgan, a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, barely looked up from her phone. She shifted slightly to allow Amara to settle, but didn't offer a greeting or even eye contact. Instead, she angled her body away from Amara, creating a clear physical boundary between them. The message was unmistakable. "You may have been assigned this seat, but you don't belong in my space." Amara took a deep breath and turned to look out the window at the Atlanta tarmac. The morning sun glinted off the wings of the aircraft, highlighting the very area where her innovative winglet design would theoretically be installed. She allowed herself a small smile at the thought. Whatever these people thought of her, they couldn't take away what she'd accomplished. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a younger flight attendant, a woman in her mid-20s with a name tag that read Sophia Rodriguez. Sophia moved through the cabin with careful efficiency, offering pre-departure beverages to each passenger. "Good morning, sir. Would you care for champagne water or orange juice before takeoff?" she asked the businessman in 1C. "Champagne, please," he replied without looking up from his newspaper. Sophia served him, then moved to the woman in 1D. "Good morning, ma'am. Would you care for champagne water or orange juice?" The pattern continued as she worked her way through the cabin. When she reached Road 2, Sophia offered the same options to Elizabeth, who requested sparkling water with lemon. Sophia poured it with practiced grace, placed it on Elizabeth's console with a cocktail napkin. Then, to Amara's confusion, walked right past her to serve the passengers in Row 3. Amara waited, assuming Sophia would circle back. Perhaps she had forgotten or was following some first-class service pattern Amara wasn't familiar with. But 10 minutes passed, and as the cabin door was about to close, Amara remained the only passenger without a pre-departure beverage. The message, intentional or not, was clear. She was invisible. With a mixture of hesitation and determination, Amara pressed the call button above her seat. The small chime echoed in the quiet cabin. It was Victoria who appeared, her posture stiff with barely concealed annoyance. "Yes," she said, the word clipped short. "I'm sorry to bother you." Amara said, her voice low, so as not to attract attention. "But I think I was missed during the beverage service." Victoria's eyes flicked over Amara's empty console. "The pre-departure service is a courtesy," she said, emphasizing the word. "We're preparing for takeoff now, and we're quite busy. I'll have Sophia bring you something once we're in the air." She turned and walked away before Amara could respond. Elizabeth made a small sound, almost a scoff, as she sipped her sparkling water, a tiny self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Amara stared out at the sprawling Atlanta tarmac. She felt a profound sense of isolation. She had earned her place here. Her mind, her talent, her dedication had put her in this seat. But in the eyes of the people around her, she was an anomaly, an error, a system glitch. The massive engines roared to life, pushing Amara back into the premium leather of her seat. The aircraft gathered speed, racing down the runway before gracefully lifting into the sky. Under different circumstances, Amara would have marveled at the physics of it all, the perfect balance of thrust and lift that allowed this metal giant to defy gravity. Instead, as the ground fell away beneath them, she couldn't help feeling that she too was being left behind, suspended in a space where she didn't belong. The flight to Los Angeles would be nearly 5 hours long. It was already promising to be an eternity. The initial ascent was smooth. the Boeing 787 slicing through clouds with an efficiency that Amara, as an aspiring aerospace engineer, would normally have admired. She could feel the physics at work, the thrust of the engines, the lift created by the wing's airfoil shape the delicate balance of forces that enabled this massive machine to soar. But the atmosphere inside the cabin operated by a different, uglier set of principles, ones that had nothing to do with science and everything to do with prejudice. Once they reached cruising altitude, the choreography of first-class service began in earnest. Victoria orchestrated it like a conductor leading an exclusive symphony, her movements precise and practiced. Hot towels were distributed with a flourish to everyone except Amara. Menus bound in soft leather were presented to each passenger with personalized greetings. Everyone except Amara. "Mr. Donovan, would you prefer the mimosa or the Bloody Mary this morning? I remember you enjoyed the latter on your flight to Chicago last month. Ms. Morgan, we have that Chilean sea base you praised on your last trip. Chef has prepared it with a new citrus glaze I think you'll appreciate." Victoria moved through the cabin with practice efficiency, addressing many passengers by name, clearly familiar with their preferences. When she reached row 2, she positioned herself between the aisle and Elizabeth's seat, physically angling her body to exclude Amara from the conversation. "Ms. Morgan, can I interest you in the braised short rib or perhaps the herb-crusted salmon?" Today, Victoria's voice dropped to a conspiratorial tone, as if sharing insider information. "The chef has outdone himself with the risotto as well. The salmon sounds perfect, Victoria. And perhaps the Sauvignon Blanc to start." Elizabeth replied, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure Amara could hear every word of the exchange that excluded her. After taking Elizabeth's order with attentive detail, Victoria finally turned to Amara. The warmth in her voice evaporated instantly, leaving behind a professional chill that could have frosted the windows. "And for you," she asked curtly, her pen hovering over her notepad. "May I see a menu, please?" Amara requested, maintaining her composure. Victoria's eye twitched with visible impatience. "Just tell me what you want, chicken or fish." The question was flat dismissive, the kind of binary choice offered in economy class, not the curated experience being provided just inches away. The deliberate downgrade in service was unmistakable. "I'd like to see the options, please." Amara insisted, her politeness a shield against Victoria's thinly veiled hostility. With an exaggerated sigh, Victoria retrieved a menu and practically thrust it into Amara's hands without another word. Amara quickly scanned the gourmet descriptions, her appetite having long since disappeared beneath the weight of anxiety and exclusion. "The risotto, please," she said, handing the menu back. "And just water to drink, thank you." Victoria noted it with a quick scribble and moved on without confirmation or pleasantry, leaving Amara with the distinct impression that her order might never be fulfilled. An hour later, the meal service was in full swing. The clinking of real silverware against fine china filled the cabin. The businessman in 1A was enjoying his perfectly seared filet mignon. Elizabeth Morgan was delicately spearing bites of her herb-sea-crusted salmon. Around Amara, conversations flowed as easily as the premium wines being poured. Amara's console table remained conspicuously bare. She watched as Victoria and Sophia moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, refilling wine glasses, offering fresh bread from wicker baskets, checking on passengers' satisfaction. They navigated around her as if she were invisible, or worse, an obstacle to be avoided. It was no longer a simple oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated act of exclusion, a power play designed to make her feel so uncomfortable, so unwelcome, that she would shrink into herself and disappear. Amara refused to give them the satisfaction. She would not break. She would not cause a scene that would only reinforce whatever prejudices were at work. Instead, she pulled her laptop from her backpack, the familiar weight of it reassuring in her hands. She opened the file containing her winglet design. The complex 3D rendering filling the screen with blues, greens, and purples representing airflow patterns and pressure gradients. The graceful curves and precise angles of her innovation were displayed in high-resolution detail. This was her territory. Here she was not just adequate, She was exceptional. Elizabeth Morgan, having finished her salmon, glanced over at Amara's screen. Her eyes narrowed at the complex schematics. "What is that? Some kind of video game?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. The question caught Amara off guard, both the sudden interest from someone who had been pointedly ignoring her and the breathtaking dismissiveness of the assumption. "No," Amara replied evenly. "It's a high-ad model for an aerodynamic winglet I designed. It reduces drag by 4.3% compared to current models." Elizabeth raised an expertly shaped eyebrow. "A winglet? For what?" "For commercial aircraft," Amara explained. "It could save airlines millions in fuel costs annually." It won the Eliza Cruz Memorial Scholarship. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Elizabeth's face. The name Cruz clearly registered. It was a prominent name in both aviation and venture capital circles. But the cognitive dissonance was too great. The young black girl in the NASA hoodie in front of her couldn't possibly be connected to that world. The Cruz Scholarship, Elizabeth repeated slowly, testing the words. "That's ambitious." The patronizing compliment hung in the air between them, technically polite, but laced with disbelief. Elizabeth turned away, effectively ending the conversation, but Amara could see the gears turning in her head as she reassessed, or perhaps just questioned, her initial judgment. The moment was interrupted by Victoria's arrival to clear Elizabeth's plate. She noticed Amar's laptop, and her expression hardened. "Miss," she said sharply, "I'm going to have to ask you to put that away now. The meal service is still in progress, and the light from your screen could be disturbing to other passengers." Amara looked around, confused. At least 3 other passengers had laptops or tablets illuminating their faces. The businessman in 1A was reading the Wall Street Journal on a large iPad Pro. A woman in 3C was watching a movie on her laptop, but Amara began gesturing discreetly toward the other devices, the other passengers. "The other passengers," Victoria cut her off, her voice sharp enough to draw attention, "are not my concern right now." "You are. Put it away now." The public admonishment was a punch to the gut. A wave of heat washed over Amara's face as she felt the stares of the other passengers. It was one thing to be ignored, but it was entirely another to be publicly disciplined for a transgression she wasn't committing. Humiliation coiled in her stomach as she carefully saved her file, closed her laptop, and slid it back into her backpack. She turned her face toward the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass as she watched the endless expanse of clouds below. They were winning. They were making her feel small. They were making her disappear. But unknown to Amara and to Victoria and Elizabeth, the power dynamic on Flight 382 was about to shift dramatically. In the private cabin at the very front of the plane, a man had just finished a series of important calls and was preparing to return to the main cabin. His name was Julian Reynolds. He was the founder and CEO of Sky Global Airlines. And he was about to discover that the brilliant young innovator, whose work he had personally reviewed and championed, was experiencing a very different version of the Sky Global first-class experience than the one he had built his company's reputation upon. The cabin lights dimmed slightly for the long stretch of flight over the Rocky Mountains, casting the first-class section in a soft, golden glow. A gentle hush had settled over the 16 premium passengers. The rustle of a newspaper here, the soft tap of computer keys there, the occasional murmur of quiet conversation. For Amara, however, the silence was oppressive, thick with the residue of her public shaming. Her meal had never arrived. Her call button, which she had pressed once more after 20 minutes of waiting, remained unanswered. The silent treatment now escalating to outright neglect. The message was unmistakable. You will get nothing. The alliance against her, spearheaded by Victoria and tacitly supported by Elizabeth Morgan, had solidified into something tangible. They seemed to feed off each other's disdain, finding common cause in their mutual rejection of Amara's presence in their exclusive domain. Each time Victoria passed through the cabin, she paused at row 2 to check on Elizabeth, offering another drink, a warm cookie, a fresh blanket, or simply a pleasant exchange. Each interaction was performed at a volume precisely calculated to reach Amara's ears, a performance designed to emphasize her exclusion. "Ms. Morgan, can I get you anything at all?" "Perhaps an eye mask for a short rest before landing." "You're too kind, Victoria. A chamomile tea would be lovely." Amara tried to retreat into her own world. She closed her eyes and began mentally reviewing the equations and principles that had guided her winglet design. It was a centering technique she'd developed during difficult times at her academically competitive high school, where being both brilliant and black had often made her a target of jealousy and prejudice. Lift coefficient equals 2. Lift divided by density time velocity squared. Wing area. Reynolds number determines the transition from laminar to turbulent flow. Wingtip vortices form due to pressure differential between upper and lower wing surfaces. Her concentration was shattered by a sudden sharp jab to her ribs. Her eyes flew open in surprise and confusion. It was Elizabeth, her face contorted with indignation, jabbing a manicured finger toward Amara. "Your music!" she hissed, her voice venomous. "I can hear it. It's completely unacceptable." Amara was bewildered. She wasn't wearing headphones. Her earbuds were zipped securely in her backpack's side pocket. I'm not listening to anything," she stammered, genuinely confused. "Don't lie to me." Elizabeth snapped, her voice rising in both pitch and volume, drawing attention from nearby seats. "I can hear that incessant thumping coming through your seat. Have you no consideration for others?" The accusation was so bizarre, so disconnected from reality, that Amara was momentarily speechless. She glanced around, noting the curious and judgmental looks now being directed her way. From across the aisle, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes leaned forward slightly. He was in his mid-60s, dressed in a casual but expensive-looking sweater over a collared shirt. His name was Thomas Wilson, a retired professor of ethics at Columbia University, though Amara wouldn't learn this until later. "Ma'am," Thomas said gently but firmly. "With all due respect, I don't hear a thing. The young lady isn't wearing any headphones." Elizabeth whirled toward him, her face flushing with anger. "You mind your own business. I know what I'm hearing." She jabbed the call button with such force that it made a sharp, audible click. Victoria materialized almost instantly, as if she'd been hovering nearby, waiting for just such a summons. "Is there a problem, Miss Morgan?" Victoria asked, her voice syrupy with concern, though her eyes immediately fixed on Amara with undisguised accusation. This girl Elizabeth spat the word like it tasted bitter as blasting her music. "I've asked her to turn it down and she's lying about it. I cannot be expected to tolerate this lack of decorum in first class." Victoria didn't ask Amara for her side of the story. She didn't look for headphones or any source of music. She simply accepted Elizabeth's complaint as irrefutable fact, just as she had on the ground in Atlanta when looking at Amara's boarding pass. She loomed over Amara's seat, her presence oppressive. "I warned you about being a disturbance," Victoria said, her voice low and threatening. "This is a premium cabin with certain standards of conduct. If I receive one more complaint, I will have the captain radio ahead, and you will be met by security personnel upon landing in Los Angeles. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air, cold and terrifying. Security for what? For a crime she hadn't even committed. For simply existing in a space where she wasn't expected. The injustice was so profound, so overwhelming, that Amara felt a tremor run through her body. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and sharp, but she fought them back with every ounce of willpower she possessed. She would not let them see her break. "I understand," she managed, her voice a strained whisper. "Good, Victoria," said a triumphant gleam in her eye. She turned back to Elizabeth with a reassuring smile. "It's been handled, Miss Morgan. I am so sorry you were disturbed." Elizabeth settled back into her seat with the air of a queen whose loyal guard had just vanquished a peasant. "Thank you, Victoria. Your professionalism is why I always choose Sky Global." The scene was over. The verdict delivered. Amara was guilty. Thomas Wilson across the aisle shook his head slowly. his expression one of profound disgust. He caught Amara's eye and gave her a small sympathetic nod, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice he had just witnessed. It was a tiny gesture, but in that moment it felt like a lifeline. It was proof that she wasn't crazy, that the cruelty she was experiencing was real and visible to at least one other person. As Victoria returned to the galley, Amara noticed the younger flight attendant, Sophia, watching from the forward cabin area. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a hesitation, perhaps even a flicker of guilt, before she quickly looked away and busied herself with the beverage cart. Amara pulled her phone from her pocket and, under the guise of checking the time, opened her notes app. With trembling fingers, she began documenting everything that had happened since boarding. The denied pre-departure beverage, the missing meal, the laptop incident. Now this false accusation about music. She recorded time's exact quotes and the names of the flight attendants involved. She wasn't sure what she would do with this information file, a complaint tell her scholarship advisors, but the act of recording it gave her back a small measure of control. If nothing else, she would have evidence that this wasn't all in her head. Across the aisle, Thomas Wilson watched her quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. Then, almost imperceptibly, he angled his phone in her direction and tapped the screen. Amara realized with a start that he was recording not her, but the cabin capturing evidence of what was transpiring. A few rows back, another passenger, a Latina woman in her 30s named Maria Gonzalez, had also been observing the situation with growing concern. A marketing executive for a major tech company, Maria had experienced her own share of prejudice in corporate spaces. She made brief eye contact with Thomas, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Amara leaned her head against the window again, watching the endless expanse of mountains and plains below. The sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The beauty of the scene outside was a stark, painful contrast to the ugliness within the cabin. The threat of security meeting her in Los Angeles echoed in her mind. Would they really call ahead? Would she be detained? Questioned? Would this incident somehow affect her scholarship, her presentation at the summit, her future? The spiral of anxiety was interrupted by a strange sense of calm resignation. She had survived prejudice before. She would survive this too. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. Every winglet she designed, every equation she solved, every barrier she broke was a step toward a world where she wouldn't have to prove she belonged. What Amara didn't know was that the balance of power on Flight 382 was about to shift in the most dramatic and unexpected way imaginable. The man who had established the very scholarship that placed her on this plane was about to enter the main cabin, and the reckoning would be swift and absolute. For the first 3 hours of the flight, the man in seat 1A had been a quiet, almost forgettable presence. He was in his early 60s with a crown of silver hair and a face etched with the lines of both stress and laughter. He wore a simple charcoal grey sweater over a light blue collared shirt, understated, elegant, and deliberately anonymous. He'd accepted a glass of water before takeoff, declined a meal in favor of continuing his work on a thick binder of documents, and had spoken to almost no one except to briefly thank the flight attendants when necessary. To Victoria, he was just another wealthy passenger who preferred privacy, the kind of undemanding VIP that made her job easier. She had afforded him that privacy without a second thought, unaware of who he actually was. His name was Julian Reynolds. He was the founder and CEO of Sky Global Airlines, the very company that employed Victoria and Sophia. He was also the creator of the Eliza Cruz Memorial Scholarship, named for his late wife, a brilliant aerospace engineer who had passed away 3 years earlier. This flight was not just a routine business trip for Julian. He was personally flying to the AeroVision Innovation Summit to present the very first award to the young prodigy whose work had so impressed the selection committee, Amara Jackson. He had reviewed her submission, personally reading it a dozen times and sharing it with the head of Sky Global's R&D department. Her revolutionary winglet design wasn't just theoretically sound, it was potentially transformative for the industry. Julian had seen her photograph, read her personal statement, and was genuinely looking forward to meeting the brilliant young mind behind the innovation. He had no idea she was sitting just a few rows behind him, enduring a silent torture at the hands of his own senior staff. Julian's work was finally complete. He closed his binder, removed his reading glasses, and stretched his long legs beneath the seat in front of him. He decided to get a coffee from the galley and perhaps stretch his legs with a walk through the cabin. As he stood, his commanding but gentle presence seemed to subtly alter the atmosphere around him. Sophia, who was preparing the beverage cart nearby, immediately noticed him and approached. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice carrying a nervous energy that hadn't been present in her earlier interactions with passengers. "Can I get you something?" "Just a black coffee, please, Sophia," he replied, his voice a calm, resonant baritone. He knew the names of most of his senior cabin crew and made a point to learn the names of new hires whenever he flew. He believed in the personal touch. "Of course, sir." Right away, Sophia replied, clearly surprised that he remembered her name. While Sophia prepared his coffee, Julian decided to stretch his legs with a slow walk down the aisle and back. As he moved through the cabin, he offered quiet nods to the other passengers. His gaze was observant, always assessing the state of his airline, the comfort of his customers, the performance of his crew. He noted the satisfied expression on the businessman's face in 1C as he worked on his laptop, the way the elderly couple in row 3 were comfortably reading their books with their reading lights perfectly adjusted. The picture of contented premium flyers. Then his eyes fell on seat 2A on the young black woman staring out the window, her posture rigid with tension that seemed to radiate off her in waves. There was something familiar about her profile, something that triggered a spark of recognition. He paused, his brow furrowing slightly. Could it be? At that exact moment, Victoria was making another pass through the cabin, collecting trash before the final descent began. She saw Julian standing in the aisle looking at Amara, and her blood ran cold. This was not part of the script. The CEO was meant to stay in his seat anonymous and oblivious to her carefully managed cabin hierarchy. She hurried over, a brittle smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Reynolds, is everything all right? Can I assist you with something?" Her voice was slightly too loud, an obvious attempt to distract him, to pull his attention away from the girl in 2A. Julian didn't look at Victoria. His eyes remained fixed on Amara, who, feeling the sudden shift in the atmosphere and the figures standing beside her, turned her head away from the window. Her eyes met Julian Reynolds. In his, she saw a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. In hers, he saw a deep, weary sadness that looked utterly out of place on the face of a triumphant 17-year-old scholarship winner who should have been basking in the glow of her achievement. "Amara," he said, his voice soft with disbelief. Amara Jackson. The cabin, already quiet, fell utterly silent. Every head turned. Elizabeth Morgan looked up from her laptop, her expression one of pure shock. Victoria's fake smile froze, then began to crumble at the edges. Amara's mind raced. How did this man know her name? She scanned his face, searching her memory. She'd seen it before in the materials about the scholarship on the Foundation's website. The silver hair, the kind eyes, the distinguished features. It was him. Julian Reynolds, founder of Sky Global and the Eliza Cruz Memorial Scholarship. "Mr. Reynolds," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Victoria looked back and forth between them, her face paling to a ghostly white. The name Cruz from Amara's ticket, which she had dismissed as unimportant or possibly fraudulent, now slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The Eliza Cruz Foundation. Julian Reynolds. The connection was suddenly horrifyingly clear. Julian's face, which had lit up with the joy of recognition, now clouded over with concern. He saw the untouched space where her meal should have been. He saw the barely concealed tear tracks on her cheeks. He saw the oppressive posture of his senior flight attendant hovering over her. He looked at Victoria, then at Elizabeth Morgan, and then back at the brilliant, heartbroken young woman in seat 2A. And in that moment, Julian Reynolds understood that something on his flagship flight had gone terribly, unforgivably wrong. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Victoria looked as though she'd seen a ghost, her professional composure crumbling visibly with each passing second. Elizabeth Morgan's mouth hung slightly, agape, her usual mask of haughty confidence shattered by the sudden realization that she had grossly miscalculated the situation. For them, the world had just turned upside down. Julian ignored them both. His focus was entirely on Amara. He crouched down in the aisle, bringing himself to her eye level, a gesture of respect that stood in stark contrast to the hours of dismissiveness she had endured. "I am so incredibly sorry," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth and sincerity that reached through the cold armor Amara had been forced to construct around herself. "I was going to surprise you at the summit, but I suppose the surprise is on me. I had no idea we'd be on the same flight. I should have checked the passenger list." He reached out and gently took her hand. "My name is Julian Reynolds. My late wife Eliza would have been absolutely amazed by your work. What you've accomplished with your winglet design is remarkable, Amara. Pure genius." Tears that Amara had refused to shed in the face of cruelty now welled up in response to kindness. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Julian saw it, and his expression hardened. He stood up to his full height, his presence now seeming to dominate the entire cabin. He turned his gaze first to Victoria, and the temperature in the aisle seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Victoria," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Miss Jackson has been my personal guest on this flight." He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "I trust she has received the exemplary service for which Sky Global is known. The question was a trap, and they both knew it." Victoria's mind raced, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled squeak emerged. She looked desperately at Elizabeth for support, but the venture capitalist was staring at her laptop screen, pretending to be absorbed in her work, her face flushed with a deep mottled red. Thomas Wilson. The gentleman from across the aisle chose that moment to speak up. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice clear and firm. "My name is Thomas Wilson, and I must tell you, the service Miss Jackson received was anything but exemplary. It was disgraceful." Julian's gaze shifted to Thomas, then back to Victoria. "Is that so?" Thomas continued, emboldened by Julian's attention. "She was ignored during beverage service. She was denied her meal. She was publicly reprimanded for using her laptop while others were permitted to use theirs. And she was falsely accused of playing loud music by that woman there," he said, gesturing toward Elizabeth, who seemed to shrink further into her seat. "And your flight attendant threatened to have her met by security upon landing. I witnessed all of it. It was a disgusting display of prejudice." Each word was a nail in Victoria's professional coffin. Julian's face became a mask of controlled fury. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sheer weight of his authority was crushing enough. "Victoria," he said, his voice now like ice. "Go to the galley. Sophia will handle the cabin for the remainder of the flight. Do not speak to any more passengers. You and I will have a conversation once we are on the ground." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. A very thorough conversation. Victoria, her face now ashen, nodded meekly and practically fled down the aisle toward the forward galley. Julian then turned his attention to Elizabeth Morgan. She refused to meet his gaze, her eyes glued to her screen as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "Ms. Morgan," he said simply. Elizabeth flinched visibly, forced finally to look up. Julian's stare was penetrating, evaluative. "I know who you are," he continued. "We have several mutual acquaintances in the venture capital world. I'm sure they would be very interested to hear about your contribution to this situation." The implied threat was unmistakable. In Elizabeth's world, reputation was everything. A word from someone of Julian Reynolds' stature could poison wells of funding and destroy partnerships that took years to build. The color drained from her face. For the first time in what was likely years, Elizabeth Morgan was speechless. Finally, Julian turned back to Amara. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by that same paternal warmth he'd shown earlier. He noticed her backpack tucked partially under the seat. "Is that where you keep your work?" he asked. Amara nodded, finding her voice. "Yes, sir. My laptop has all my designs." "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the backpack. She handed it to him, and he carefully removed the laptop. He opened it, and his eyes lit up as he saw the complex, beautiful 3D rendering of her winglet design. He studied it closely, zooming in on particular features, nodding appreciatively at the sophisticated airflow modeling. "Incredible," he said softly. "Truly remarkable work, Amara. Eliza would have loved this." She always said the future of aviation was in elegance and efficiency, not just brute force. He looked back at her, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "You represent everything my wife believed in. You are the future." And then in the middle of the first-class cabin in front of everyone, the CEO of Sky Global Airlines leaned down and wrapped his arms around the 17-year-old girl. He gave her a hug. Not a polite corporate embrace, but a real heartfelt hug. It was a hug of apology, of validation of mentorship, and of profound respect. "Welcome to the family, Amara," he whispered. "I am so sorry for your experience." As Amara hugged him back, she finally let the tension of the last few hours wash away. She felt seen. She felt validated, and she knew with absolute certainty that the consequences for Victoria and Elizabeth were just beginning to unfold. The quality of silence in the first-class cabin had transformed. What had been a thick, oppressive atmosphere of exclusion was now charged with a different energy, the electricity of power shifting of a hierarchy being dismantled and rebuilt in real time. The air itself seemed to vibrate with it. Julian straightened up his hand, remaining gently on Amara's shoulder, a clear statement of alliance and protection. He turned to face the cabin at large, his expression grave but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily throughout the premium space. "I want to apologize for the disruption. More importantly, I want to apologize for what appears to have been a serious failure in our service standards." His eyes scanned the faces of the passengers, some looking embarrassed, others curious, a few openly sympathetic. "My name is Julian Reynolds. I'm the founder and CEO of Sky Global Airlines, and more relevantly at this moment, I'm the founder of the Eliza Cruz Memorial Scholarship for Young Innovators." He gestured toward Amara. "Miss Jackson here is our inaugural recipient selected from over 8,000 applicants worldwide for her revolutionary winglet design that could transform aviation efficiency. She is in every sense our honored guest." The revelation rippled through the cabin. A few passengers exchanged glances. Elizabeth Morgan stared straight ahead, her face a rigid mask of mortification. Maria Gonzalez, watching from a few rows back, pulled out her phone and discreetly began typing notes. As a marketing executive who had dealt with her share of corporate PR crisis, she recognized the significance of what was unfolding. Julian continued, his tone measured but unyielding. "At Sky Global, we have always prided ourselves on treating every passenger with dignity and respect. What I'm hearing and seeing suggests that we have failed dramatically in that mission today." He paused, his expression somber. "That failure will be addressed thoroughly and immediately." Sophia approached cautiously from the galley, her expression a mixture of anxiety and determination. Julian noticed her and beckoned her forward. "Sophia, isn't it?" he confirmed. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, her voice steady despite her evident nervousness. "Sophia, I'd like you to handle the cabin service for the remainder of our flight. Please ensure that Miss Jackson receives whatever she would like and that all passengers are comfortable for our descent into Los Angeles." "Of course," Sir Sophia nodded, then turned to Amara. "Miss Jackson, can I bring you anything? Perhaps some food? You haven't had a chance to eat?" The simple acknowledgement of this fact stated plainly in front of everyone was its own form of validation. The deliberate neglect was being recognized, not hidden or excused. "Just some water, and maybe a sandwich if you have one," Amara replied, still feeling slightly dazed by the dramatic turn of events. Right away, Sophia assured her, then hesitated. "And I'm sorry. I should have done better. The quiet admission hung in the air, a small but significant acknowledgement of complicity through inaction. Julian nodded slightly, noting the apology, before turning his attention back to the cabin. "I'd like to thank Mr. Wilson for speaking up," he said, addressing Thomas directly. "Your willingness to bear witness to what you observed is greatly appreciated." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Some things shouldn't be allowed to happen in silence, Mr. Reynolds." Julian agreed with a slight inclination of his head. "Indeed." He then turned to Elizabeth Morgan, who was still desperately avoiding eye contact. His voice dropped, becoming private but not exactly gentle. "Miss Morgan, I believe you owe Miss Jackson an apology." Elizabeth's head jerked up, her eyes wide. Being directly addressed left her no room to continue pretending to be elsewhere. She swallowed hard, her throat working visibly. There was a misunderstanding," she began weakly. Julian's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Was there about the headphones that weren't there? About the music that wasn't playing? Or was the misunderstanding more fundamental, about who belongs in which spaces? The direct challenge left Elizabeth speechless again. After a painfully long moment, she turned slightly toward Amara. "I apologize for the confusion." She said the words mechanical and clearly reluctant. Julian waited his expectant silence, making it clear that this perfunctory statement was insufficient. Under the weight of his stare, Elizabeth continued, "I was mistaken about the music, and I should not have spoken to you that way. I apologize. It wasn't heartfelt, but it was better." Julian seemed to decide it was enough for now and nodded once in acknowledgement. Sophia returned with a tray for Amara, a selection of premium sandwiches, fresh fruit cookies, and a sparkling water with lemon. She set it down carefully on Amara's console. "Please let me know if you need anything else," she said, her tone warm and genuine. As Sophia moved away to attend to other passengers, Julian glanced at his watch. "We'll be beginning our descent into Los Angeles in about 40 minutes. He noted, then looked back at Amara. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to join you for the remainder of the flight. I'd love to hear more about your design approach." "I'd like that," Amara said, a small smile finally appearing. Julian gestured to the now vacant aisle seat beside her, which Elizabeth had hastily abandoned for an empty seat in row 4, moving her belongings with impressive speed once Julian's attention was elsewhere. As Julian settled into the seat beside Amara, the other passengers gradually returned to their own activities, reading, working on laptops, preparing for landing, but the atmosphere remained charged. What had happened would not be forgotten or dismissed. It had been witnessed, acknowledged, and addressed by the highest authority present. Thomas Wilson caught Amara's eye and gave her a small, satisfied nod. Maria Gonzalez continued making notes on her phone, occasionally glancing toward the CEO, and the young scholar now engaged in animated conversation about winglet design principles. In the forward galley, visible through the partition, Victoria stood rigid and alone, her face a mask of barely contained panic. Her career, her reputation, her future, all hanging by a thread that Julian Reynolds would decide whether to cut once they reached Los Angeles. As the plane began its gradual descent toward the California coast, Julian and Amara were deep in conversation. Her laptop opened between them as she explained the specific innovations in her design. Julian asked insightful questions, pointing out applications she hadn't considered, suggesting potential manufacturing approaches that might make implementation more feasible. "The beauty of your design," he said, zooming in on one particular feature, "is that it's not just incrementally better. It's approaching the problem from an entirely new perspective. That's what Eliza always did. She didn't just improve existing solutions. She reimagined the questions themselves." For Amara, this validation from someone who truly understood the work, who could appreciate both its technical brilliance and its creative approach, was beyond price. After hours of being diminished and dismissed, she was being seen for exactly who she was, a young innovator with a gift that deserved recognition. Tomorrow at the summit, Julian continued, I was planning to announce a development partnership for the winning design, basically offering our R&D resources to help refine the concept for potential real-world application. Would that interest you? Amara's eyes widened. Are you serious? That would be incredible. Julian smiled. Consider it done then. And perhaps this summer, if you're interested, we could discuss an internship with our engineering team. The conversation continued as the plane descended through clouds, the sprawling expanse of Los Angeles gradually coming into view below. For Amara, the transformation was dizzying. Just an hour earlier, she had been fighting back tears documenting mistreatment and dreading the possibility of being met by security. Now she was discussing career opportunities with the CEO of a major airline. Her design potentially on a path to actual implementation. As the captain announced their final approach to LAX, Julian closed Amara's laptop and handed it back to her. Amara, he said, his tone serious. What happened today, it shouldn't have happened. Not on my airline, not anywhere. I want you to know that there will be significant changes as a result. She nodded, equally serious. I believe you. Good, he said, because what matters now isn't just addressing this specific incident. It's about ensuring it doesn't happen to the next brilliant young mind who might not have a CEO sitting a few rows away. As the aircraft's wheels touched down on the runway with a gentle bump, Julian Reynolds and Amara Jackson sat side by side. The established visionary and the emerging one, united by brilliance, by purpose, and by the understanding that true change requires both power and the courage to use it. The moment the wheels of Flight 382 touched down at LAX, a new reality set in. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the first-class cabin had been demolished and rebuilt in the flight's final hour. The new center of gravity was Amara Jackson, and her protector was the founder of the entire airline. As the aircraft taxied toward the terminal, passengers began the familiar routine of gathering belongings and preparing to depain, but there was nothing routine about the atmosphere in the premium cabin. Glances were exchanged. Whispers passed between rows. The drama they had witnessed would be recounted at dinner parties and business meetings for weeks to come. Julian Reynolds remained seated beside Amara, making no move to return to his original seat. His message was clear. His priority was ensuring her safe and dignified exit from what had become, for a time, a hostile environment. My driver is waiting, he said to her quietly as the plane approached the gate. Frank will take both of us to our hotels. No arguments. His tone was kind but firm. Amara nodded, still processing the dramatic reversal of her circumstances. Just an hour earlier, she had been dreading the arrival at LAX. Now she had the CEO of Sky Global as her personal escort. When the seatbelt sign finally dimmed and passengers began to stand, Julian rose first, retrieving Amara's backpack from the overhead bin and handing it to her with the same care he might give to precious cargo. The gesture was small, but symbolic of public acknowledgement of the value he placed on her and her work. As they prepared to move toward the exit, Elizabeth Morgan made her move. She stood up from her newly claimed seat in row 4. Her face a carefully arranged mask of contrition. She positioned herself in the aisle, effectively blocking their path and forcing a final confrontation. Mr. Reynolds, she began deliberately using his surname after her earlier failed attempt at familiarity. I cannot apologize enough. I was stressed, exhausted from back-to-back meetings this week. I completely misread the situation. It was unforgivable. Julian regarded her steadily, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond immediately, allowing the uncomfortable silence to stretch between them. The other passengers watched, riveted by this final act in the drama. The thing about character, Ms. Morgan, he finally said, his voice cool and measured, is that it isn't defined by how you act when you're fresh and well-rested. It's defined by how you act when you're tired and stressed. You showed us exactly who you are today. He paused, letting the words sink in. Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Jackson has a very important event to attend. He gently guided Amara around Elizabeth, leaving the venture capitalist standing alone in the aisle. Her apology rejected her status rendered meaningless. She had likely never been dismissed so thoroughly in her entire professional life. Julian and Amara were the first to step off the plane. At the end of the jet bridge, a stone-faced Sky Global gate agent was waiting with Victoria. The senior flight attendant's helmet of blonde hair was no longer perfect. A few strands had come loose, and her eyes were red-rimmed with barely contained panic. "Victoria, I need your ID badge and wings." Julian said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "You are on administrative leave effective immediately. Do not report for your next scheduled shift. You will be contacted by Human Resources to schedule a formal review, and I strongly suggest you bring union representation." Victoria's hands trembled as she unpinned the plastic ID badge and metal wings that represented her entire career at Sky Global. She handed them over without protest, her gaze fixed on a point of utter despair somewhere on the floor. She couldn't bring herself to look at Amara. Julian turned to the gate agent. "Please escort Ms. Palmer to the crew lounge and arrange for transportation to take her home. She is not to access any secure areas or crew facilities." "Yes, Mr. Reynolds." The agent replied, her expression a mixture of awe and apprehension at witnessing such a high-level disciplinary action. As Julian and Amara walked away toward baggage claim, the first ragged sob escaped from Victoria, a raw, broken sound that echoed down the sterile airport corridor. Amara felt a complex mix of emotions. There was vindication, certainly justice being served, but there was also a strange, unexpected twinge of empathy. Victoria's career was likely over, at least at Sky Global, possibly in the industry as a whole. The consequences of her actions were real and severe. "Are you all right?" Julian asked, noticing her expression. "Yes," Amara said after a moment. "Just processing everything." Julian nodded, understanding. "It's complex, isn't it? Taking no action would have been wrong, but there's rarely joy in watching someone face the consequences of their actions, even when those consequences are deserved." "Exactly." Amara agreed, impressed by his perception. They were met at baggage claim by Julian's driver, a tall, dignified man in his 50s named Frank. He greeted his boss warmly, then turned to Amara with a respectful smile. "You must be Miss Jackson. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Mr. Reynolds has mentioned your work." "He has?" Amara asked, surprised. Frank nodded. "He was quite impressed by your designs. Mentioned it might change how we think about wing efficiency." Julian smiled slightly. Frank was an Air Force mechanic before joining Sky Global. He understands more about aircraft than most of our executives. As they settled into the plush leather seats of a black Lincoln Navigator, Amara finally allowed herself to fully process the extraordinary reversal of her day. That morning, she had been a nervous teenager on her first solo flight, excited but apprehensive about the journey ahead. Hours later, she had endured humiliation and discrimination, only to be recognized and championed by one of the most powerful figures in the aviation industry, Mr. Reynolds. She began hesitantly. "You didn't have to do all that." Julian turned to her, his face serious. "Amara Sky Global is more than just a company to me. It's a legacy. What happened to you today isn't just a service failure. It's a cancer that can destroy everything we've built." He looked out the window briefly, his expression distant. "My wife Eliza faced that kind of dismissive prejudice her entire career. People constantly underestimated her because she was a woman in a traditionally male field. She fought every day to be seen for her brilliance, not her gender." He turned back to Amara, the foundation. "This scholarship there meant to build a world where brilliant minds like yours are judged only by the quality of their work. What Victoria and Miss Morgan did was a betrayal of everything Eliza stood for, and I will not tolerate it in my company or in my presence." His voice was quiet but intense. "This is only the beginning, Amara. The changes we need to make are much deeper than just disciplining one flight attendant." Amara was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. He wasn't just defending a passenger. He was defending his wife's memory, her legacy, and the future she had wanted to build. "Thank you," she said simply. During the drive to the hotel, Julian was on his phone making calls in a voice that was calm but carried unmistakable authority. "Sarah, It's Julian. I need you to open a full investigation into the conduct of Senior Flight Attendant Victoria Palmer. Yes, Flight 382 today. I want her entire service record pulled, every complaint, every commendation. I want interviews with every member of her crew, past and present. I have a witness, a Mr. Thomas Wilson, who was in seat 3C, get his contact information from the manifest and offer him whatever assistance he needs to provide his account. I want this handled by the book, but I want it handled swiftly. After ending that call, he made another. This one was shorter, but potentially more damaging for Elizabeth Morgan. David, it's Julian Reynolds. I'm fine, thank you. Listen, I was on a flight today with one of your investment partners, Elizabeth Morgan of Morgan Capital. Let's just say I found her behavior toward another passenger to be utterly unprofessional and, frankly, discriminatory. No need for details right now. I just thought you should know who you're in business with. You know me, David. I don't make these observations lightly. Yes, exactly. Reputation is everything in your world. Talk soon. He hung up, not needing to say more. He had just planted a seed of doubt about Elizabeth Morgan's character directly into her professional network. David would tell 2 colleagues who would each mention it to 2 more. The quiet unraveling of Elizabeth's carefully cultivated professional image had begun. By the time they reached Amara's hotel, a 5-star property where Julian had personally arranged for her to have a suite, she understood that she had witnessed more than just an airline CEO correcting a service failure. She had observed a masterclass in the wielding of power and influence for a righteous cause. The navigator pulled up to the hotel entrance, where a uniformed doorman rushed forward to open the car door. Before Amara stepped out, Julian placed a hand lightly on her arm. Amara, the summit begins tomorrow at 10:00. My driver will collect you at 9:00. Tonight, order whatever you like from room service. Get some rest, and remember you earned every bit of this recognition through your brilliant work. Don't let today's unpleasantness diminish that for even a moment. I won't, she promised, feeling a new confidence in her voice. Good. Julian smiled. Because tomorrow, you're going to stand in front of the brightest minds in aviation and show them the future. And I, for one, can't wait to see it. As Amara walked into the luxurious hotel lobby, escorted by a differential bellhop, she felt something shift inside her. The fear and humiliation of the flight were receding, replaced by a steely determination. She would not be defined by how others had treated her, but by her own brilliance and resilience. Tomorrow would be her day. And the karma that Victoria Palmer and Elizabeth Morgan had set in motion was just beginning its descent. 3 elements defined Amara Jackson's ongoing legacy in the years that followed. First was her continuing technical innovation. The adaptive winglet technology she developed during her junior year at MIT became the industry standard, reducing aviation fuel consumption worldwide by an estimated 7.2% when fully implemented. The environmental impact was substantial equivalent to removing millions of cars from the road, while the economic benefits made the technology irresistible, even to carriers initially resistant to change. Second was the educational transformation sparked by the Amara Jackson STEM Flight Academy. What began as a single program in Atlanta expanded to 5 cities within 3 years, creating pathways for hundreds of underrepresented students to enter aerospace careers. Many cited Amara's story as their inspiration proof that brilliance could overcome barriers when supported by structural change and courageous allies. Most profound, however, was the cultural shift her experience catalyzed throughout commercial aviation. The Passenger Dignity Accord, initially adopted by Sky Global, became an industry benchmark. Carriers found that authentic respect, not just performative courtesy, created measurable business advantages through customer loyalty, employee retention, and brand reputation. For Amara herself, the most meaningful outcome wasn't professional recognition or even witnessing industry transformation. It was the quiet knowledge that a painful moment had been transformed into a powerful movement, that dignity denied had become dignity defined, defended, and ultimately delivered for countless travelers who would never know her name but would benefit from her journey. The seat you occupy, Amara, often reminded the young engineers she mentored is less important than the character you bring to it. And character tested by adversity, but strengthened by purpose, can change not just individual lives, but entire industries. Her story stands as proof that even at 37,000 FT, no one should ever be made to feel small, and that with the right combination of brilliance, resilience, and support, we can all rise to our greatest heights. If you found this story inspiring, please hit the like button to help others discover it too. Your subscription means you'll never miss another powerful tale of justice and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their brilliance matters, regardless of how others might try to diminish it. Leave a comment below sharing a time when you witnessed someone standing up for what's right. Your stories inspire us all to be